would sing the next time I saw you. And so here we are. Woo! Woo! Astro bright, starlight, take your light to the fight. The whole wide world is addicted. How did our souls get evicted? Some say it's the nature of the beast. Some say the devil will take your peace. Some say you're the master and God of it all. Some say His amazing grace can only help you after you fall. Peace in the valley, peace in my soul. Happy birthday.
I was stuck. I'd made myself a good cage and had babies. I moved to Olympia from the East Coast. I was working as a nurse. I was very in a cage. And I think I mentioned that I'd been an artist when I was a child all the way up through that time.
Can I say something?
Yes.
So there's more to this story than what I did. Shaw came in. Shaw knew what she wanted. She wasn't quite ready to take it, but she could have had it, except she needed to hire somebody to say, that's what you're going to do. And she said, and so I said, that's what you're going to do. And she said, oh, okay. So she was brilliant. Brilliant.
First, I'd like to thank Rick, because when I moved to Olympia 10 odd years ago, I met Rick through SPSCC, and Rick said, you have to meet Susan, and then I think my world changed. And I experienced community at a new level, and I see a lot of that here now, and I think none of us can thank you enough, Susan, for being who you are. Thank you. Happy birthday.
I wanted to say a couple of things about growing up with Susan. I met her when I was 16. I had been through quite a lot by then. My childhood home was not a healthy environment, so I'd been on my own for 2 years in Seattle. Susan was different from any other person I'd ever met in my whole life up to that point. As she and I got to know each other, I wasn't a brutally trusting kid initially, it became this really new kind of experience for me. Someone that I admired and who I could trust was taking an actual interest in me and my perspectives. And I was thinking about this differently recently because I came down and was at a talk that Susan gave at a studio, her gallery. And in that talk, she talked about engaging with whatever the thing is that she's going to paint on and sort of inviting images to emerge. And as I drove back to Seattle that evening, I thought about what she had said, and I thought, wow, that's exactly how she always was with me. And the quality of her attention made me want to talk to her more, and I did. A lot. I talked her ear off. I'd seek her out. She had a studio down in the Childhood Zen building up where the glass guys used to be, and the front door was always locked, so I'd climb up on the roof and crawl in. And I'd talk to her sometimes all day, like 8 hours. And she was always very welcoming. Later, she told me, much later, actually pretty recently, she told me it was always it was not always, but sometimes strenuous to listen to my talking. But she could tell that I needed to do this, and she didn't ever stop me. She became a sounding board for whatever I was going through, still is sometimes. I was up on Division Street, I was hitchhiking, and this young woman pulled up who I had a crush on. she stopped, and I could see it was her through the window, and she was somebody I'd seen around. And she leaned over and rolled her window down a tiny bit, and she said, "Do you eat meat?" And I said, "Yeah." She said, "I'm sorry, I can't let you in the car." So I got home that night and I talked to Susan about it, and I was kind of agonizing. I found myself tempted to adopt vegetarianism to meet girls.
Don't do it.
But I also found that idea of being fake like that, that's how I conceptualized it, to be just reprehensible. So I was in this conflict. Susan helped me puzzle through it. We talked about genuineness and self-discovery and politics, and we developed an experiment to figure this out. So I would raise some animals to see if, in the end, I could kill them and eat them. Susan found us the livestock auction in Chehalis, kind of immediately, and we drove down and voted on them. We bid. Took home these 3 tiny pigs. I made a giant pen for them in the backyard. I have old book of them.
Say their names.
Red pig.
Red pig.
Red pig.
White pig. Bambi. Bambi got spots. I was trying to remove all the, take away all the distance. And I walked them down the beach, which pissed Lynn off a little bit. and read to them and did everything.
Say what Lynn said when you brought the pigs up to her
Let me
house.
have to demonstrate. She saw me, and then she said, "I won't have it." I won't have it. And then we had a huge party, a bunch of bands, about 150 friends. It was great. We shot Bambi, cooked her in a pit, and ate her. It was a great party. That was fun. No guilt, no remorse. Felt really good about it. And it became very clear that from my own perspective, mine, I was definitely not a vegetarian. When I think back on how all that happened, it's obvious that Susan parented me through that whole progression in a way that's a lot like how she described making art. She invited me to be more of myself and then stayed engaged with me throughout that whole process. I couldn't have done it without her, but apart from that, her involvement made it way more fun. It was our project. Susan did all that with and for me with tremendous generosity and creativity, and it meant the world to me. It was very formative, very foundational for who I am now. And so I'm here today with my career and my beautiful family because of Susan. I will forever be so grateful for all that love and the teaching and friendship and her artistic form of parenting.
I've only lived at the Bay for about 4.5 years. And, part of that time I was unemployed, so I spent a lot of time with Susan when she was around and doing her thing, mainly watching her like a creep. Just like, she's gardening again, she's painting again. But then, but she was nice enough to allow me to have my own little studio adjacent to her studio inside the house because, Olympia's fucking cold. So, there wasn't a lot of outside things to do. But during that time, we had a lot of really good talks about her philosophy. And you know what? She didn't teach me shit because she just listened to me. And I'm like, okay, are you gonna talk? But I realized, I found out that she was a therapist, so it was kind of like, it's old habits, like, yeah, tell me about you. I'm like, oh, okay, let's talk about me. But I'm really bad talking about myself, so that was really nice that someone wanted to find out about me for that. She brought us in, she's like, no, this is your home now. And then Susan's like, when are you moving here? I'm like, dude, no pressure, okay? Jesus Christ, we just got here. Anyway, one crazy storm-filled day, long ago, far, far away. Like I woke up and it sounded like a freaking hurricane. I'm like, what is going on? And then I see this lady. I didn't register in my brain yet what was going on. This lady was battling this gigantic thing. I'm like, that's Susan. But that's the whole point of Susan. She doesn't wait. She acts. She does it. You know, and that's the whole metaphor of me living in the Bay and like watching her making the Bay her home. It's not that it's the most hospitable place, but it's her place. You know what I'm saying? That's what Susan is to me, and that's what she'll always symbolize. I didn't have enough time to meet everyone that Susan has touched. She's like, what are we out now? She's our Kevin Bacon now. Can we? Yeah. Oh yeah, you know Susan? Yeah, fuck Kevin Bacon.
Carlo said everything, almost said everything I wanted to say, but yeah, just that drive out and being so stressed out and then arriving at the Bay and Susan inviting us in for tea really just felt like we had arrived home. And I moved to Washington 8 years ago. You know, it's so crazy to think I've only known her 8 years because she feels like family. And I just remember being out there one morning in particular, working from home and just seeing her with her cats in the yard, playing with flowers. And I was talking to my coworkers, and I'm just like, wow, I want to be Susan. She's living like she's just the way she lives, the way she approaches life. You're just one of the most amazing people I know, and I feel so blessed that I got to live in the same place as you for 7 years and talk to you whenever I want. So thank you, love you, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
I met Susan. I moved to Olympia in the early 1980s, reveling in the beautiful environment that she and Rick have created. You're coming out to dinner parties, you're celebrating birthdays, you're going out there trying to help her locate her cat, endlessly locating all of her cats. Susan, thank you for being the hub and the connector for so many of us, so that we have been able to meet one another and revel with one another and support each other. Happy birthday, my dear, dear friend, and we don't know what's going to happen next. It'll be another Susan Christian adventure.
Well, let me speak, because I have to correct some things.
Please do.
Kathy's full of shit. All the things that she says that I did, I was present for a bunch of them, but I didn't make them happen. You made a lot of them happen. Lucy made a lot of them happen. The thing that's so cool about us is that all of us are very good at making things happen. I don't know why that's true. It's sort of a little bit like it's catching. Like if somebody will make something happen, somebody else will say, well, why couldn't we do this? And then everyone said, well, all right. And so that's been going on. We had that drawing group, and we were doing life drawing, and this is really back in the 80s, which now seems like forever ago. And we would have to scramble for a place to do it from week to week, and we just would. We'd managed to do it. And it was just a bunch of people. We'd get some innocent person who was willing to take off all their clothes and say, good. Okay. And then the next week, we'd ask that person, they'd say, no, I don't really want to do that again. Who will we get and where? And because we were hungry. And it's been so fun. It's been so fun. This has been such a nice period of history for me. Well, it was the only period of history I've ever had, but I certainly liked it. And, but I just, Kathy, I love Kathy, but she lies, and she. So I just want to say that there were a lot of people that got a lot of things done in the time that I've been around here, and you're one of them. So shut up.
I met Susan maybe a couple years ago. Rose was out, my partner Rose was already good friends with her. And so when I found out we were moving out there, I thought it was a great idea because it was a wonderful opportunity and cool spot and all. And it's just so amazing the power of you and that place there. Like Rose and I have a beautiful house on the west side. Rose is a gardener extraordinaire and everything looked beautiful. And as soon as we started moving out there, Rose moved out there immediately, never came back. And I called her, the garden's looking awful. I don't care. It was just amazing the transition and the power you and that place had. And now living with you is very wonderful and powerful. And I'm very inspired by your positiveness. Constant positive interest in others and everything going on, in feedback. Like her cats and our cat, at first we were all going to have to live in the same house, and they were kind of not so sure they'd be able to do that. And at one point our cat got kind of beat up by somebody, and I came home from the vet with him, and Susan goes, "Where you been?" I've been to the vet with my cat. And he said, "What happened?" He got beat up. And then she goes upstairs. And then comes down a bit later and she goes, "I talked to Biscuit and he says he didn't do it." It was like, okay, I'll go there. It's just wonderful. Any situation always has this really great ending in it. So thank you, Susan. I love our life we're all living right now. Thank you all for being
It feels like Susan has been part of my life. I think we've talked about this. I don't know that we know when we first met. But I know she wasn't there when I was born. And I know she was already in Olympia when I came here at the age of 20. I mean, just listening to everybody else talk made me remember more events. I was reading this book by Gene Houston called The Search for the Beloved. And Susan and I were talking about it because Susan had read it too. And she said, let's do a group, because it's basically a guide for doing a group. They were all guided meditations that we went through. So it was a remarkable experience and made a big difference in my life just to go through that. And there it is again, what so many of you are saying. Susan is just so willing. Snula is so willing to embrace a new idea like that. Well, let's just do it instead of talking about it. I've always loved that in Susan. And thank you for being you and for having another birthday.
I have had the pleasure of living next to Susan for 50 years almost. I think we're very close to that, if not on the mark. Can you imagine that? I mean, seriously, we have stayed put in the same place, in the same funky houses that we got in 73, 74? Marilyn, what year was it?
It was
1974. We bought these houses, or what we considered to be habitable buildings. I was reminded, because of the people who've spoken, how many wonderful people have been in my life because Susan had so many people coming and going. I mean, seriously, it's like, it has been the richest life. I mean, not that I never have anybody coming and going, but not like Susan. In fact, the first few years, I started keeping a chart of the people who came and went. And I wish I had kept that because it was quite hilarious. From the time that, who was that chased, we had a high tide and the entire wood supply for the winter went out into the bay. And Shorty it was who went out with a lasso and lassoed the logs and brought them back. Do you guys remember this? Were you there then? It's just been a delicious life. It couldn't have been better. It still is wonderful. When Susan comes to visit me or I to see her, we've had, in recent weeks, we've had like 4 or 5 hour conversations. We just keep going. There's one thing after another. And it's not old stuff. We're not telling old stories about, except for the, I won't have it story. I know more about that story now than I've ever known in my life. I didn't know the backstory. It's really good, but I know this part. Susan, thank you for all the years of marvelous friendship and all the fights and all the, this was not the only time I did that. But it's all been fun, it's all been wonderful, and thank you all for being here and honoring my dear friend.
I just want to thank you, Susan, for when I first moved back to Olympia after being gone for a while. I was pretty, it's a hard town to kind of break into sometimes, even if you're from here. I don't know why. But Susan saw some show or something down that I did at some, I don't even know what, and then she was like, you gotta have a show at my space. And so I did put a show at her space, and then we talked for hours and hours and hours. I think you actually talked, though. Yeah, I think I shut up and you talked. But maybe I'm remembering that wrong. I don't know. I talked? Oh, shit. Well, anyway. I think you were a foundational part of my life coming back here. And ever since, you're really wonderful. Thank you. Happy birthday.
So I only wish that I would have been able to meet you when you first came to town, but I would have been about 14. It seems like my path would have been different when I started. If I'd met you like in 1987 or something, I would have been like more creative, or I don't know, I'm just glad to be part of this and part of you. Thanks.
The interesting thing about everybody's talks is that I learned about all the things I wasn't invited to. And the thing that no one also is talking about is the thing that I love most about Susan is her rage. She can get so mad.
Oh, yeah.
And she could tell you, like I could go to her when I first came to Evergreen, and she was there, and that's a whole long story, we had to take hours to tell Ellen, but I would have all sorts of issues and problems and stuff with certain people, and then I'd go and say, well, this happened, and she'd say, I hate him! And I was so relieved, I was totally relieved. I said, oh, good, you do. And of course, neither of us really hated anybody, but it was a way to just sort of bust balloons, which she was very, very good at. And in Olympia, there was a kind of a tiptoeing quality about how one related to everybody. And you just didn't rock the boat too much. But Susan had no problem with that, especially in private if you're having tea, and she said, tell me about what happened. And then you tell her, and she said, that's disgusting. So Susan You know, you are a peach, and we love you, and you're kind and generous, but you also have the best anger and the best expression of sort of pinholing where we should direct our attention, which is not towards our own culpability ever. Now, as an Italian from New York, I'm always guilty about feeling about almost things, but Susan has been my friend for 100 years, and she has always aided me, like just extending a hand and saying, well, just come over here, dear. So it just took me out of it. Just come with me, dear. Thank you. Happy